Hey, everybody. One of the things that I do while I sit and work is I sometimes will listen to podcasts, I'll listen to news, I'll listen to kind of other things in the background while I'm, you know, kind of picking away at my work here. And a lot of what I've been hearing about lately is the women's hockey team that was the butt of a joke made by the president of the United States. And I want to talk on that, and I'm going to talk more on it next week. So if you are seeing this now, just so you know, you are getting a sneak peek into my mind space here real quick. I also use Substack here because it generates content for me, which I really appreciate. I love that feature on Substack. So let me get into this. I have some thoughts here that I want to get out. And part of it is the joke that isn't a joke. Okay, because there is a particular kind of joke that women learn to recognize very early in life. It's the kind where a woman becomes the punchline. We've all felt that at some point. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's disguised as harmless humor, and sometimes it's wrapped in phrases that we've heard repeatedly lately, which is relax, it's just a joke. But the effect is always the same. It's a woman's competence, it's her intelligence or her achievement, and it's quietly being diminished for the sake of a laugh. Um, and I think we've all seen it. A woman accomplishes something meaningful, and someone responds with a comment that frames her success as either accidental, emotional, or undeserved. And we've heard this. She slept her way to the top. How much did we hear that in the recent most recent election cycle? And we're hearing it even in this current election cycle, where the achievements of women like Jasmine Crockett are being diminished. She's often, stated as being too emotional. She's people joke about, and I use the term joke loosely here, but they joke about her being too ghetto, veiled racism, right? And I want to point this out because these are the things that I'm hearing. This is kind of what's directing my writing for next week. Um, because a lot of the times that's where our achievements are diminished to that point. Maybe she slept away there. Maybe she succeeded only because someone helped her. Maybe she's just lucky. But rarely is our success allowed to stand on its own. And that's what makes this dynamic so powerful. It's not the joke itself, it's the expectation that we're just going to laugh along with it. Because the moment a woman refuses to laugh, that's when the room gets visibly uncomfortable. And suddenly the humor just disappears. And the underlying message becomes visible. And that is precisely why these jokes persist. They rely on our participation. And my phone decided to get heavy. There we go. I want to say hi, Stephanie, Dr. Stephanie, welcome. Um, and so I'm using this live mainly, again, to get these thoughts out of my head and also create some fun promotional material. So that's where my mind space is right now. I'm listening to what's going on with the women's hockey team. I'm listening and seeing the kind of the discussions around powerful women. Kamala Harris was out on her book tour, and the comments that I saw on social media and the discussions that I was hearing, it was just sad, and people were making crude remarks and disguising it as humor. And I think that there's so much to be said about that. And even with Jasmine Crockett, we've seen so many comments just about how she presents herself, and her strength and her energy is translated as aggressive. When we see those same qualities in men, they're upheld as these good characteristics. And so, one of the things that I've noticed in life, and I notice it in my own personal life, is that women are taught to stay quiet. And I find that really interesting because and this is for generations, women have been trained to maintain harmony. Um, and that's even at the expense of their own dignity. And so we are taught that calling out something is rude, or we're being emotional, or we're just we're PMSing. Another joke, right? And that correcting someone makes us difficult. And that standing up for ourselves is dramatic. But what we very rarely say out loud is that the silence that silence that they want us to maintain, it serves a purpose. It protects the comfort of others, not ourselves. We've got to put ourselves on the line, but it protects the comfort of others. And so when a woman stays quiet after being the punchline, everyone else gets to remain comfortable. No one has to examine the bias behind the joke. No one has to question the assumptions that made the joke funny in the first place. Silence keeps the peace, but it also maintains the hierarchy with it being men and their achievements on the top, and then women on the bottom. Because the moment that a woman calmly says, "That's not funny," or when she even asks, "Why is that funny?" When she challenges that system, that's when something in the room starts to shift. And so suddenly that dynamic becomes visible, and when that dynamic becomes visible, people get uncomfortable. And then people are asked to examine what they've been treating as normal, and people don't like being called out that way, okay? And discomfort enters the conversation, and when discomfort enters the conversation, people tend to get defensive, and that's when they go out and attack. "You're just being emotional. Go pop a Midol." And they dismiss us and our feelings. And so I'm bringing this all back into some of the topics that I've been talking about lately in my blog and my Substack around language. And the one thing I've been noticing is that there's power in naming things. There's power in naming what is happening. And I say there's power in naming things because, I mean, even the Bible starts off with Adam naming everything, right? And there's this idea that, he held dominion over it all. So he held dominion over it after he named it. And so I kind of took that idea and said, well, what would happen if we started naming what is happening? We kind of take dominion over it. We take the power that goes along with naming that. And so a language from the start has always been powerful. And that's why they wanna keep us silent, because they know the minute that they allow us to speak is the moment that they're gonna start to lose that power, because language allows us to name what we are experiencing, and that is when it becomes concrete. It doesn't just become this abstract thing that they can laugh off. When something remains unnamed, it can be dismissed, it can be minimized, they can ignore it, but the moment we put words to it, then all of a sudden it becomes real. And so this is why learning to speak clearly also matters. And so it might sound something simple. It might sound like something simple. Asking again to explain and have somebody say, "Explain to me why that joke is funny." Okay, or saying that made me uncomfortable. I didn't like that. Or just calmly acknowledging that that accomplishment deserves recognition rather than dismissal. I worked hard to get to where I am. I deserve the recognition. And that's one of the reasons that for myself, I know when I get my PhD, you know, um, I don't want to shrug off the power of having people call me doctor. I earned that. And there is power in that name. There is power in that title. Um, and there's recognition of my work as well. And so when a woman uses her voice in that way. She's not just advocating for herself, and that's something very powerful. We're not just advocating for ourselves. This is when we are demonstrating to everyone else in that room that the power and or everyone else in the room that the pattern that they're engaging in is visible. I see you. I see what you're doing, and that it no longer needs to be accepted as normal. And so language, it will start to shift our culture because it exposes the assumption that culture has been built on. It exposes that people just assume that we're going to stay quiet and that we're going to accept the joke when we're not. And so these moments matter. These moments matter a lot more than we realize because right now it's easy to dismiss moments like this as small or insignificant. Oh, I'm just overreacting. It's not that big of a deal. How many times do we go in our head and and repeat that kind of script to ourselves, minimizing and diminishing our own feelings? They're right. It was just a joke, right? I'm sorry, but jokes are supposed to be funny. And there was nothing funny in that moment. Um, and so the thing is our culture is made of those small moments. The shape and the direction of our community is made of those small moments. So every time we just decide to laugh along with a comment that diminishes our accomplishments or another woman's accomplishments, that message is reinforced. So, and every time a room moves on without acknowledging what happened, the pattern is not only reinforced, it becomes stronger. And so, on the other hand, every time someone calmly interrupts, it doesn't have to be explosive. Okay. You can very calmly call out the pattern, interrupt the pattern, because then something there starts to shift, something happens, and the room learns a new possibility. We've now chosen a different trajectory. And someone watching that may realize that they don't have to accept the joke either, that they're not alone in that room and in their discomfort, and that they don't have to be quiet. And then the next time it's you saying something and them saying something. And it will grow. It will have that ripple effect. Right? Because if someone younger sees it, I oftentimes think what my daughter would say if she saw me in those moments. And if she saw that, she will see that it is possible to respond differently, that it doesn't have to be accepted. And then over time, those moments accumulate one right after another, and they slowly will start to shift the expectations of what we are willing to accept and what we're not. And that's powerful. That is cultural and social change. And it's something, it doesn't happen in that single dramatic moment. That may be the Kickstarter, but it happens and it's reinforced and it grows in strength through those thousands of small moments, those small times where we choose to react differently, where someone decides to speak instead of staying silent. Um, and in this way, we use language as an act of self-respect. Our language becomes a way of us respecting ourselves, because at the heart of this conversation that I'm having in my head and now with you is that there is something deeper than just correcting a joke or addressing a sexist comment. It's about recognizing that your voice has value. When you speak clearly about what you need, about what you expect and what you won't accept, where your boundaries are, you're not creating conflict. The conflict was already there. They just, for the longest time, made it your responsibility to hold it and to just deal with it silently. So you're not creating the conflict. The conflict is already there. What you are doing is that you're establishing clear boundaries. You're establishing new norms. You are choosing self-respect over the comfort of others. And I feel like for a lot of women, especially, this could be very unfamiliar territory. Because we were raised and have spent, I know for myself, I've spent the majority of my life prioritizing politeness over honesty. And honesty doesn't have to be rude, right? But it also doesn't have to be sugar-coated. Um, and we also have been prioritizing harmony over truth. And there comes a point where silence begins to cost more for us than the discomfort of speaking. After a while, we grow resentment. We get frustrated, we're angry. And, that builds over time and it eats away at us. It causes us stress. It causes us discomfort and we suffer in silence. And I want to be here to just say, I think one of the things that I do want to point out, and I'm trying to figure out how to point out in next week's discussion, is that, using your voice, it doesn't require anger or confrontation. Um, it can be something very simple. Just, again, asking the question or just setting the boundary or just stating the truth calmly, flatly. This is how it is. Um, and not letting it be ignored or pushed aside or minimized to a joke. And I want to say that those moments of language will matter because they're reminders. They're reminders to you and to everyone around you that your experiences, your achievements, and your dignity, they deserve to be acknowledged and respected. And sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do is simply refuse to be the punchline. So that's where my head is currently as I'm trying to work through next week's content. Um, because I think that in the conversation of language, especially when it comes, because this I think also wraps into a lot of the other themes that I talk about around shame. Because those jokes are shaming. They're horribly shaming. And that's, I think, a tool. It's a tool to keep certain people oppressed. It's a tool to keep certain people quiet because if they weren't quiet, then, oh goodness, things are going to get uncomfortable for the people who are making the joke, for the people who are in power, for the people who the hierarchy is supporting at the top. And so we get this shame placed on us to keep us quiet, to keep us compliant. And so as we're working through this language, we have to kind of come up to this point of saying, you know what? This isn't mine anymore. What you just said is not okay. I am an accomplished person. And the thing is that women have been accomplished throughout centuries, throughout generations, but have been overlooked or completely written out of history by men. And men, I'm here to say, I'm not against you, right? But we have to understand that the intrinsic harm that's been done here for a long time. And we have to understand why sometimes when us women get hurt, we just don't say anything. We shut down. We internalize. We get quiet. One word answers. And I think a lot of that has to do with here is that, when we are making these jokes, when we're being minimized in this way, it's to make us feel shameful. It's to make us feel small. And it's time for us to kind of stand up and take that back. It's time for us to start using our words. Uh, and so that's where my head is right now. So I want to thank y'all for sitting here and let me kind of work this all out as I work on next week's outline, and as I listen to the news. And I want to say, when you see a strong woman, okay, when you see Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, the Jasmine Crockett, um, of this world, and you see them sitting there speaking up and saying what needs to be said, cheer them on, and understand that strength lives in you too. That strength lives in you too. And know that you can go out and you can make that kind of impact as well. So there you go. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you, Dr. Steph, for being here. I appreciate it. Um, I'm going to get back to writing now because I think I got a clear path forward. And so keep an eye out. I'll have my Substack letter, which comes out every week. Next week is the blog, though. And the blog's going to go dive deeper into the root method, which is what I introduced last week. So this idea of reflect, open, organize, and tell, and how that's going to work in this way. But I needed a moment to reflect and organize a bit. And so I really appreciate you all giving me that opportunity to do this here on this live. Um, have a wonderful day. I'm going to get back to work while I have some time. And I'll see y'all next week.